Hi folks, I'm Andy from BlackJack Legacy and you're watching This Week in Wargaming, the weekly show that keeps you up to date with the latest news in the wargaming world so you can decide what's hot and what's not. This week we wonder what happened to Warcry, we grab our torch and shield and go dungeon delving with some dwarfs, and I look to the future and ask, what have the pit lords ever done for us? Let's start off with a bit of a firefight. Some of you will be aware that the sci-fi game from the team at Mantic recently had a bit of a glow up, as the cool kids say, where they balanced up the factions, polished up some of the core rules, and added in a new way to play the game called Annihilation, which sees you being able to really play those large-scale vehicle battles. I can't wait to see folks playing those. Well, the book that you need to play all of this latest and greatest stuff is Firefight Command Protocols, and it's now back in stock and available to buy after selling out its initial batch. It will also be coming to the digital Mantic companion app this week too. Firefight really has the potential to be a mainstay in the sci-fi wargaming landscape, much in the same way that Mantic has done so with Kings of War in the fantasy world. I ran an online slow grow campaign earlier this year for Firefight, and we celebrated it by having a narrative day of gaming at Mantic HQ for some of the lucky folks who both managed to complete their armies and could get their hands on a ticket. I'd love to do something similar with the inclusion of Annihilation into the Mantic sci-fi universe. There's some fantastic vehicles available for the game, and I'm looking forward to seeing the community's paint schemes and gaming table photographs. If you're Firefight curious and want to know more, you can check out the links in the video's description to see what all the fuss is about. What's this? Another Blackside Studios news story? Those folks over in Texas really do know how to get the hype going. Well, it's time. It's news of a new upcoming game from the company that brought you Don't Look Back and Himetsu. Pit Lord is the latest title to come from Blackside Studios, which is written by Malev Shinobi with minis sculpted by Stephen May, where you can prepare yourself for gladiatorial combat in a cosmic fantasy setting. This is newsworthy not least because it's another of Malev's solo microgames. For those who may have had their interest piqued a little, please check out the first game designed by Malev called Demon Ship, which was such a unique idea in wargaming I couldn't fail to back it myself. I bought the digital only version at pre-order, which allowed me to print out the bits for myself, and I can tell you it looks absolutely stunning. The game's easy to pick up, but with lots of replayability in it, and the way you move from room to room, resetting the player tile to represent the next encounter is such a great way to get a lot of game in not a lot of space. I think there's a real niche for this kind of micro game in the industry, so much so, I might even give it a go at designing one myself. Pit Lord will go live on Blackside Studios on Wednesday, October the 4th, where you'll be able to crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentations of their women for yourself. Now, I am all about championing the variety and options available in our hobby of choice, and there are some amazing independent wargaming companies out there that don't always get the attention that they deserve. So with that in mind, I bring you Void Scar Miniatures. Void Scar, by their own description, are a small but ambitious tabletop miniatures company based in Nottingham in the UK, and they produce 1/100th scale sci-fi minis along with their own game system to use them in called From Ashes. The miniatures are inspired by a near to medium term future sci-fi theme, and they integrate many realistic and concept military designs into them. Whether you're looking for a small scale game to play to really get that feel for mass combat at longer ranges, or you're just looking for something completely different to paint up, then Void Scar Miniatures might well be what you're looking for. To give you something to whet your appetite, here are some renders of a new faction called the Zerak Triarchy, which will be coming later this year. There's some really cool looking stuff in this new faction, and whilst I don't think I've ever painted anything at this smaller scale, which is roughly around 15mm, this is the kind of thing that could convince me otherwise. Head over to Void Scar Miniatures on Facebook and show them some love. Next up, as I dip my hand into the stack of wonders and pull out another diamond, is Torch and Shield from Grimskald Games, an upcoming tactical skirmish game set in the ruins of the Dwarf Empire. The game is primarily a competitive game pitting two dwarf delving crews against each other in a tile-based dungeon setting. However, the game will also feature co-op and solo modes, so there's something here for every type of gamer. This will be launching on October the 10th through Kickstarter, and we'll see initially 3 starting factions: the Copperbrows, the Iron Thanes, and the Buldars. The game is designed to be miniature agnostic, however they do offer their own miniatures and dungeon tiles, and these will be available as both physical products and digitally as STL files for those of you who love a bit of 3D printing. Torch and Shield's gameplay uses a hybrid card and dice system, and all you'll need is a standard deck of cards and a handful of D6. It uses the cards to determine initiative and dictate their actions, so you can give priority to the warriors of your choosing by assigning them high value cards, or you can wait with a low card for the perfect counterattack. Once a card's been assigned, the suits of the card will then determine what special actions your vertically challenged warriors can make. After initiative and actions are complete, dice are then used to determine the contests and resolve actions using a simple success-based mechanic. I love the sound of this, and I've always said that I think the standard deck of cards is a very much underused design mechanic in miniature wargaming, as it gives some range to the results, mixed with the predictability of a known deck with a memory of what's been played and what's still to come. The dungeon tiles look great too, so I'll be watching this with interest to see how this one performs. Now, the world of 3D printing moves fast, and whilst games companies are still getting their head around whether to embrace it into their arms or bury their heads in the sand and pretend it doesn't exist, the folks who've created their businesses around it are starting to see some real leaps forward. One Page Rules is almost at 20,000 paying subscribers to their Patreon every single month, which shows the scale of things, and My Mini Factory continues to be the one-stop shop and Amazon of the 3D printing world. Well, speaking of My Mini Factory, one of their sub-businesses, Only Games, is showing off something that is so futuristic, it wouldn't surprise me if they start to sell time travel soon. Using some very nifty state-of-the-art equipment, they now have the ability to 3D print pre-coloured minis. Now, this is not just using blue resin, for example, or changing filament between printing layers. This is 3D printed resin minis which look as though they've been painted. Independent 3D sculptors can now upload their pre-coloured digital files to Only Games, where these resin wizards will print out the coloured miniature and send it to their customers. Now, this is in its early stages, so it'll take a little while to get a big volume of different miniatures to choose from, but companies such as Steamforged Games have already got a model on their site, so this could be huge for board games, role-playing game characters, or skirmish game minis. It might be cost prohibitive for large army-scale games, but this definitely has its place. Having gotten to see these in the flesh when I was at UK Games Expo this year and being able to take one of the minis away for myself, I can truly say that they do look fantastic. For those not interested in painting, these are a cut above a basic paint job that you may pay a commission painter for, and whilst may not win any golden demons, they are certainly better than any grey plastic or resin. You can check them out in the link in the video, and I hope to follow this one closely and see what companies start to capitalise on this exciting new technology. Lastly, I wanted to touch on a game that I absolutely fell in love with when I first played it, and yet it seems to have just fallen off my radar, and that's Warcry by Games Workshop. This week sees the pre-order for a new boxed Warcry release called Hunter and Hunted, and includes 2 warbands, the Ogre Gorges and the Wildcorp Hunters, along with a nice piece of terrain, the Moor Pit. It also brings the release of another 2 warbands in the Cruel Boys Monster Killers and the Vulcan Flame Seekers, and if that wasn't enough, we get a new terrain set called Ravaged Lands Scales of Talaxis. Warcry players have never had it so good. Now, I have to admit, I love every one of these releases. Something Age of Sigmar, Warhammer Underworlds and Warcry have all managed to do for me, where 40k has struggled, is to innovate and bring in wild, wonderful and thematic minis that cross over between the games. The 40k world feels a lot more rigid to me in comparison. So I love Warcry's rules, I love Warcry's setting, and I love the Warcry minis. So why don't I play it anymore? Well, my dear friend and subscriber, I mean, you do subscribe to my channel, right? I'm not 100% certain. I think what happened for me personally was the timing of some of the releases, and this wasn't Games Workshop's fault. The release of Warcry Catacombs and the books for the Grand Alliances all happened in October and November of 2020, slap bang in the middle of a global pandemic when not only could I not get out to play games with folks, I couldn't even leave the house. I'd bought the Catacombs set and painted it all up, but couldn't get to play it, and I didn't want to spend money on the 4 new books, not knowing when I'd next get it to the table. And so my enthusiasm for Warcry waned a little. Even when the rules went free online later, I feel like by then I'd moved on to games like Marvel Crisis Protocol, and so Warcry took a bit of a backseat. But you know what? It's still a fantastic game, and these new sets might be just the thing to get me to break out my Warcry stuff again and get playing. I always had fun, fast games of Warcry, and it wasn't a difficult game to show others how to play, so maybe it's time to dive back into the Warcry world. That's it for this week in Wargaming. Let me know what you think about the stuff I've covered here, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe so that you are kept up to date with what's happening in the Wargaming world. See you next week, and happy hobbying.